Welcome to the Scientific Sense podcast, where we explore emerging ideas from science, policy, economics, and technology. My name is Gil Eapen. We talk with world's leading academics and experts about their recent research or general areas of topical interest. Scientific Sense is an unstructured conversation with no agenda or preparation. We cover a wide variety of domains where new discoveries are made and new technologies are developed on a daily basis. We are most interested in how new ideas affect society and help educate the world how to pursue a rewarding and enjoyable life rooted in science, logic, and information. We seek knowledge without boundaries or constraints and provide unedited content of conversations with researchers and leaders who love what they do. A companion blog to this podcast can be found at scientificsense.com, and this podcast is available on over a dozen platforms and directly at scientificsense.net. If you have suggestions for topics, guests, and other ideas, please send them to info@scientificsense.com, and I can be reached at gil@eapen.info. Guest today is Professor Richard Mammone, Professor in Engineering and Business at Rutgers University. He is a Fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, a recipient of the Thomas Edison Patent Award, and an inductee of the New Jersey Inventors Hall of Fame. He has published over 200 papers and has 30 patents. He was a founding editorial board member of the IEEE Neural Network Society and was Associate Vice President of Innovation and Partnerships of Rutgers. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you, Gil.
I want to start with your 2016 paper, Decision Quality Support in Diagnostic Breast Ultrasound through Artificial Intelligence, where I believe you showed that it is better than human interpretations. And medical ultrasonography is an alternative to mammography, but I guess it has a lot of variability in terms of interpreting the results. Can you talk a little bit about the data that you used and what the motivation was for the study and ultimately what the conclusions were?
Oh, sure. So I'm going to go even a little bit further back to about 2011 when I first started, and with this whole idea. And basically, mammography is the gold standard for screening breast cancer. So there's about 40 million mammograms taken every year in this country, and it's pretty well established that this helps reduce the number of deaths in this country from breast cancer.
Yeah.
And so the problem is that mammogram machines are pretty expensive. You have to have experts who can manage them. And the idea was that in the developing world, in low and middle income countries, there's very far fewer mammographers and mammography machines, and it's just too expensive. Yeah. And what became apparent to me and to others is that ultrasound was actually a viable option to mammography. Mm-hmm. So right now, ultrasound is used after mammography. So typically what happens is after a mammogram, if it looks fine, then that's the end of it. If there's a cancer, then you go to the cancer. But if it's sort of in the middle, if there's a lesion and you're not really sure, then you could go to ultrasound.
Yeah.
And so the ultrasounds are used, but they're used primarily for that narrow, part of the process. And what happened was some studies started showing that you can actually detect some of the most dangerous cancers, and you could detect them very early. And what's evolved over the years is that due to dense breasts, due to the material being difficult for X-rays to get through, the mammography actually has some weaknesses, and ultrasound goes through those by seeing through the dense tissue and finding these cancers, especially for young women and different ethnicities have more, in Asia and in different
Yeah.
countries. So what I started studying back then was, what about using, and ultrasound is much lower cost. So an ultrasound device you can get and put it onto your smartphone or onto your iPad or computer, and maybe, for under $1,000, whereas a full blown ultrasound might be $100,000, and a mammogram machine might be several hundred or $1 million. So the idea was to get these into the hands of people all over, and eventually, honestly, my ultimate goal was to get it to be a consumer device that you would get, maybe a couple $100 device that women could do at home, and just put it on their smartphone and do self breast exams themselves.
So if we are using ultrasound as sort of the second mode of diagnosis after mammogram, and if ultrasound is better, why do we use mammogram at all?
Well, that's controversial. It's historical. Mammograms started, and they're the gold standard. They're the standard of care, so that's the accepted practice. As you know, the way that the FDA and the way the medical profession works is you have to have many, many studies over many, many years, and you have to statistically prove that something, is efficient and safe. So that's been done. We're slowly, because of the dense breast issue, people are starting to look at using ultrasounds as a screening device. So there's a whole bunch of terminology, and I'll try to get around to it. But to do screening means you don't show any symptoms. So in order to be a screening device, only mammograms are approved. Diagnostic device means you have some symptom. So in other words, if you had a bump, then you could use ultrasound. If you had some discoloration of your nipple, or if there's some indicator, if you had a mammogram and the mammogram was suspicious, then you could have an ultrasound. But right now, the way the standard of care works is you can't go right to ultrasound. Now, because of dense breast, there's an exclusion in most states, and it's working through the legal process that if you have dense breast, because then mammogram doesn't work. So as well, at all. I mean, because when you have dense breast, what happens is the ultrasound, everything looks white. So you're looking for a little white chip of calcium inside a sea of white, and it's just not going to be, a good thing. So the ultrasound doesn't have that problem. So ultrasound is slowly working its way to becoming part of the standard of care as a screening device, not just a diagnostic device. And anticipating that, 10 years ago, basically, I thought it was going to happen much faster, honestly. The idea was to make a low cost, and really the initial focus was mostly in countries like in India, China, Africa, where the number of radiologists is very few per million women.
Yeah.
And and the number of devices is very, very low. The number of mammogram machines is extremely low in these countries. And so the idea was to just give a very low cost device that you could. Lots of people have smartphones, even in these countries. There's entrepreneurs in Africa and in Asia, and it turns out I went to a conference in 2011 in Geneva, and the whole idea of it was, how can we take developing world innovations and help the low and middle income countries? And it turns out that there's this entire ecosystem of women, basically, who do all these amazing things. And so the idea was they use smartphones, and they have solar recharging, and it's like a whole it's like a really amazing thing. It makes you ashamed of your gender, but because it's virtually all women. But the idea was to get these devices to them to put on their smartphones, and then they could do the breast exams, and ovarian and other things could follow suit. So that was the initial impetus for all of this. And
so that is so there are two things there, right? So what you have proven, I think, initially was that if you use ultrasound imaging, and we have quite a bit of variability there based on the human interpretations,
right,
and that seems to ultimately results in a lower positive predictive value, because they
right,
tend to kind of err on the false positive position. for reducing the risk. And I think what your data showed was, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can deploy artificial intelligence on that data, and the predictive power coming out of AI was actually better than humans.
Right. So the first thing was to go to the ultrasound, and then the next thing is that, well, even with trained healthcare providers, the big problem with ultrasound is the variability due to not just interoperable, not just across people,
Yeah.
but even the same person, they get tired, they
You had a bad day.
they have a bad day,
Yeah.
they just did 100 scans, they're kind of so in all of medical diagnosis, you always have two numbers. There's not just it's not just accuracy. It's not just one number. You always have sensitivity, which is how many true positives do you get, and then
Yes.
there's specificity, which is how many true negatives do you get. So and a lot of people forget that frequently. That if they're not in this industry, and the idea is that both numbers have to be good. Both numbers at the same time. You can always improve one number at the expense of the other. So the idea is, yeah. And then there's a third thing, which is the interoperability, the interoperator variability, so that an intra operator variability, so that within the same. So all of these problems, the fact that we want to give this primarily to women, midwives, nurse type people, and we want it to be just as good as if a professional did it, and we want it not to vary between the times that they do it, and not to vary between one and another doing it.
Right.
So the idea then hit us that why don't we use artificial intelligence? And this was, believe it or not, before deep learning. Deep learning hit big time in 2012, and then it really took off in 14, when convolutional neural nets hit. So this was before that. I was in AI, I was in neural nets before it was cool. So we said, let's use neural networks. And what we'll do is we'll train the neural net to learn the best. We got one of the best radiologists, or I think she's the best radiologist for breast cancer in the country and probably the world. And we trained on her way of doing it. And the idea was to have, her name is Wendy, so it would be Wendy in a box. It was to have
easily replicatable.
Yeah, so that everybody could be as ideally as good as Wendy. And so we trained on her way of, because like most medical, I don't want to generalize, but there's a lot of parts that are not algorithmic. You can't just say, if there's not a syntax that you could follow an algorithm that you just say, well, if this, then that, then do this, and a rule-based type of system. It's much more like, well, if you feel this over here, then you go over there. And so,
but in this case, Rick, in this case, though, if you're using neural nets, you actually have labeled data, right? So you can take historical information. And so even in the absence of Wendy's heuristics and expertise, you could still train a neural net with just historical labeled data, right?
Well, the way it works is so that you have all these kinds of problems. You break down to two problems: there's detection, and then identification. So detection is, as you're scanning, say, the breast, you're seeing two-dimensional images at every point on the breast, and you're moving pretty quickly. So you're seeing a two-dimensional image, then a few fractions of a second, another one. And as you're scanning through that, if you see a lesion, if you see calcification, if you see any kind of anomaly, you have to stop. So the first thing is detection. Do you see it now? Now, seeing it, what does seeing it mean? We being humans, we take advantage of, we take it for granted that, seeing something and recognizing is very easy. It's not that easy, for a computer. It's pretty hard. So first thing is there's a neural net that has to do detection. It has to say, I see a lesion, I see a calcification, I see some anomaly, stop moving.
Right.
So right there, when you label it and you say you see it, that's a human decision, right? It's not, there's not a measurable,
right.
We only see the ones that people see, in quote. I'm doing air quotes. You can't see it on. It's, what does see mean? It's like when AI started in the 1940s, people thought that seeing and talking and that would be really easy. It's the chess playing and the hard things. It's like, nope, the chess playing and all that was easy. relative, it only took 40,
Yeah.
50 years, but it's the seeing and the hearing, and those nuanced very things that
Much tougher problem.
much
So
harder.
Wendy's heuristics really.
So she
So
labels,
you
first of all,
train the machine to basically pick up if Wendy is seeing it or not, so to
right.
speak. Yeah. Okay.
So you're going through hours and hours of tapes, and where she says, this is where you look, that's where you look. Now, the next thing is, once you look there, then you dwell on it, and you take a couple of still frames, you stare at it, you look for different, there's a list, a BIRADS list. There's like a sort of a checklist that you look for, is
Yeah.
it spiculated, is it lobulated, is it so, and you look for these things, and then you score those things. Now, that came relatively recently, that kind of algorithmic approach. Before that, a good doctor, a good healthcare would look at it and say, yeah, this is cancer, this is not cancer. This now, everything is usually broken, as you know, in decision theory, being an expert, that three things. So it's like, this is definitely cancer, this is definitely not cancer, and I don't know what to do. So
Right.
if you think it's cancer, or I don't know, there's another step, and the next step is a biopsy.
Yeah.
So the idea is, and lots of medicine I found, because I had medical device companies before this, and they're kind of based on a lot of intuition and art, maybe even more than science, though.
Right.
So getting the person and getting the people who really know, like there's radiologists, if you go to a hospital, there's radiologists that everybody who works in the hospital knows go to that radiologist.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like there's a difference, and we've seen that too in our studies with different radiologists. There's some people can read a lot of images and not make too many errors. Some people read slower and they make less. Like there's all
Yeah.
different. So what you want is the best, right? You want to have a model of how to do this the best possible way, and how to do it in two steps: how to find anomalies the best, and then how to diagnose the best. So that study, the 2016 study, I'm finally getting to it after all this time. I don't know if we still have time to talk.
Oh, sure.
Is what we did was we took some of the best some other really top-notch radiologists. There's a mammography quality assurance organization that you have to be approved by, and these people were all approved. They all had 15, 20 years experience in doing mammography, reading mammograms and ultrasound images for mammography. And so what we did was we compared our system, the computer AI system, to them. And that's the paper where we showed that the computer system did better than the best one of them.
And there was something like 1,300 samples.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, in this case, both lower sensitivity and specificity are costly, because if you have a false positive, then you have to go through biopsy and set of actions around that, which is
Right.
also tend to be quite costly, right? So it is so the typical metrics that we use to look at, like the AUC of an ROC curve.
Right.
What you've shown is that it is actually superior to what experts would have concluded on the same 1,300 images.
Right. And one of the people in the study, one of the radiologists, she was the best performer. So, like, again, each one has a different ROC curve. Each individual radiologist has their own ROC curve. So some radiologists have a better. So the area under the ROC curve is how good you are, right? So there's the two types of errors, and you want to get one number, so you use the area, and that's the convention in medicine. Yeah. And so there's actually people who have very good area under the curves, people who don't have such good. And what we did was the AI system did better than the best person. So it found cancers that even she did not find when she did the reads, herself. And so, what that one thing that would lead you to believe is that, well, if we gave this to the midwives and to the people who weren't healthcare professionals, that it would do as good as a radiologist. So we actually had an NIH grant with a foundation, and the NIH as well. NIH gave us like $4 million, and we studied this in Mexico, and we gave it very not. We didn't use a lot of training of the women. They were students, they were medical students and nurses, things like that, and they did better than the radiologists because, again, radiologists, they're doing a lot of things. They might be experts in lots of things, so they're in general they have an average performance.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I
So,
mean,
so where is FDA on all of this? As technology improves, there is no question that we're going to see machines doing better in this type of things when there is a complex set of data, whether it's images or very highly multifactorial type information. Almost all the studies that we look at, the machines appear to do a lot better than humans. So I wonder where is the regulatory thinking is on these types of technologies now.
so back around that time, I had a spin-off company which I've since sold,
Yeah.
but so we did the first FDA approvals for our software, and I found the FDA to be just really helpful, really smart, and 100% behind having this happen. They just want to make sure that it's done scientifically, it's done statistically,
Yeah.
correctly. So they were very, very helpful. Um, a lot of clinical trials have to be done, and a lot of steps, and you know, it it will happen. It is
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and a lot of the problems surround the data, how to get the data, because as you know, privacy of medical
Right.
data, HIPAA compliance, and people are, there's a lot of extra layers of problems that you have to work through. But
Right.
I mean, we did manage all that. We did get FDA approval for our device, and there's more. We did it in a staged way, so we got approval to help. In the beginning, and then eventually, I think before people trust in this country, before people trust just taking your cell phone up and doing your self breast exam or prostate exam or whatever, and getting your phone to tell you if you have cancer or not, we're probably still 5-10 years away. But
So that is,
it
yeah.
definitely will be coming, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems so. So that is what you're working on. So more recently, your IEEE paper, on-demand teleradiology using smartphone photographs as proxies for DICOM images.
Right.
So this is, from in the field practical implementation perspective, this seems to make a significant difference, right? I mean, if you can take a picture of the image and that can be transmitted maybe to a human expert, maybe more likely an AI machine, and if it has reasonable, predictive power, that seems like a very powerful concept.
Right. So what we ran into in the business, we were working with all the big vendors in medical imaging, and in various ways with different partnerships and everything. And what we found is, I mean, there's no competition is fierce in this industry.
Hmm.
There's no real incentive to collaborate, to exchange data, to move data back and forth. So if you're working on a Siemens machine and you have an AI system that is on a GE machine or on a Philips or something, nobody is letting you easily move your images around, or and especially my original goal was to do this in the developing world. So in the developing world,
Yes.
you have people who may have some old donated ultrasound machine that's not the most up to date, doesn't have a lot of software and things like that,
Mm.
and they might even have an X-ray machine or something. And so what you want to do is, and that's what they know how to use. I mean, they're not trained on some new, if you sold a complete contained system to them, gave them a handheld ultrasound, and it was just a few $100s, and you plug it in your phone, and you got to run your software, and that might be actually a bigger burden to these people than just using whatever they already have. So the idea was to get, and also the interoperability here is, if I have one kind of machine, usually the people who make that machine will let you use their AI system that they're developing. And when they're done with it, that's when you'll get your AI system. And the AI systems could really help open up the productivity all over the world and could help save lives, because there's, even though in developing world countries, we actually have a higher percentage of women who have breast cancer, because they, all different reasons. They think the diet and whatever, but we actually have a low percentage of them who die. In the other countries, they're catching up to us in terms of obesity and all the other things, and breast cancer is another one. And at the same time, their death rate is much, much higher, because they don't have the medical tools to help them to diagnose it early, and then therapeutics.
So the incidence rates are lower in developing countries,
right?
But post-diagnosis, their survival rates are lot lower.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. And it's like one of the experts explained this to us, that, I mean, these women, usually they have to work and they have kids, and they're really busy. So until they have a tumor that's as big as a grapefruit, they don't even come to the doctor. And then by the time you see it, it's like, this is, you got a couple of weeks. So and so it's But the idea is, if they had a way of, and because going to the doctor is a big thing, and
Sure.
So if you had, meanwhile, there's this network of entrepreneurial women who, if they could, help each other and do it themselves, and see if they got breast cancer early. So that was the dream, and the idea is that if they're using, whatever devices they're using now, maybe we could just, the first step of our long, goal would be to just, they're already using smartphones for microfinancing and business transactions, and they're also
smartphones are definitely there. Yeah, but can they self-administer, Rick, the ultrasound?
Can it what?
Can they self-administer the ultrasound image?
No. So I mean, the ultrasound transducer, because that would be another FDA approval, and that would be like another, to plug it. And we have, since 2011, there's plenty of competitors now who are doing this. So there's companies that have cheap ultrasound transducers that you put in your smartphone. They have the software. Everything that I set out to do is kind of getting done. With this, which is good, which is all that, as an academic, that's what I wanted. I wanted to see it done. Right. Some of it's not getting done because it's not profitable. I mean, selling, getting to these back villages and stuff, there's not a lot of money there. So that's the thing that I'm still pushing on. And the way I think to do that is, again, in tranches, because if they already have a smartphone, they could just download for free or very low some software, which then they could use any kind of old ultrasound machine or x-ray machine, and then they can have the AI right there. So AI, people who make AI modules can make them all available, just like any app would be available on your smartphone. And then the people in the trenches could use them for all different things. So, and all you would need is the phone. And eventually, I think, there's a couple of companies. There's one in particular that got a tremendous amount of money, and I think they probably are gonna be the first ones to get the ultrasound transducer on your phone. And it'll be $100 or $200, and then you just plug it in your phone, and then it'll all happen there. But the software, you still have to use their software. So this gives an alternative. Competition, I think, is the best way to keep the consumer in the powerful position. So being able to just use the phone with any device, I think, is still an option that we should get on the market.
But there still has to be the image, right?
Right,
So there still has to be an ultrasound machine in proximity. So right. So
right.
before you can take a photograph, yeah, yeah,
Right. I mean, the advantage of it though is that it doesn't have to just be an ultrasound. Now it could be any kind of medical imaging device, and what
okay,
it makes a free market economy out of right now. If you're a small company and you have an AI and you prove that you could read mammograms better, how do you get to the mammogram?
Mhm.
There's no method because GE and Philips and the guys who run it, they're not going to let you get your AI there, and the FDA and everything. So if you're on a platform where anybody could use anything, then I think progress will be accelerated, and competitor, the competition will open up. So it's more an intermediate step. It's sort of like the way Netflix used, CDs, DVDs for video before they went to streaming.
Yeah,
Yeah, the future, as we set out 10 years ago, is going to be the device. But right now, people are bundling everything, and this is, it's more of a business uh, thing. It's also because it'll allow more competition,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's also just uh, it broadens the scope because each AI application takes a ton of work. So there's people who concentrate on working on just heart ailments, just bone fractions, just lung, and so if you want to use all of them, uh, and for whether it's X-ray or CAT scan, or you have to go through the market and try to figure out, and here again, you would just have an app, and you could the doctors, it'll just accelerate the whole process of
yeah. I mean, you're thinking here, it's so in developing countries where they don't have access to screening, it is typically much more delayed, from an optimum perspective before they actually find it.
right,
Technologies like this, even if you tune it in such a way that you reduce the false negatives, it may still be a way to take the first step, right? It may not be the ultimate diagnosis, but it might actually could get the people at the higher risk of having a problem to a more a higher accurate diagnostic
right.
process.
I mean, so like in Mexico, we had women who traveled 8 and 10 hours by bus and to come and be in our clinical study down there because they had no other option. In most countries, you might have to wait a year to get a breast exam, to
Yeah,
go and see a doctor. So if you have productivity tools, that the doctor has productivity tools, because there might be one doctor for many, many miles, and they may be in this village, in January, and then they go to this village in March, and then they go. And so if they have a tool that they can rapidly, um, you know, do the diagnostics on their phone, they can go through it much quicker
yeah,
and do more women, and then more women can come, lower the cost, lower the, increase the productivity, so more women can get looked at. And eventually, again, we know the long goal is to get the device onto the women. But right now, the reality is that's not the way it works. There's healthcare providers, and you got to work with the system that exists. And what's the next step? Because
right.
there's so many. Uh, you know, by the way, in other countries like in China and Japan, you could go right to ultrasound. So they have much more dense breasts in a lot of these in Asia, and I think India too,
Mhm.
where you could go right to ultrasound because they don't have the standard care that we do, and also because for whatever reason those countries have, and also the women are younger. Another
Yeah.
strange thing is the women who get cancer are in our world, they're usually a little older, so they have dense breasts, so they go right to ultrasound. So they're
Mhm.
already using the ultrasound. So this would be a way to speed that up. And if a doctor could do 10 a day, now they could do 20 a day, so more women could be seen. And it's the next step. It's sort of like, and it's something that I've done in my career several times. I start too far, like too ambitious, and then
Yeah.
what you have to do is just back up and say, okay, what, you know, in the late 70s, I was working on LASIK eye surgery. And now you know what that is. But for 20 years, no one knew what that was. So it was like, and all the patents have expired. So it's like the trick is timing. Like, 90% of getting things right is the timing. And so I think going all the way to the ultrasound transducer on the phone, I do think that will be just like LASIK surgery did happen. I think that this will happen, but I think this is a step. And there's a bunch of cool problems and a bunch of other things that will be allowed. Another thing that I wanted to say back when we were talking about the decision support software, and I know you're a decision guy, is that there's a thing in artificial intelligence that if you have two different decision-making devices, you could always fuse them. You could always combine them. If their errors are uncorrelated with each other, there's always a way to combine them so the final decision will be better. So the idea of that study, one of the subtext of the study, which was kind of hidden in the nerdy in between the lines, is that by using the doctor and the device and having the two opinions fused together, you could do better than either one.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's
because in this case, it's almost two completely different modalities, right?
Exactly.
So the power of that combination will be even higher. Yeah.
Right. And the things, and that's why we didn't want, we walked away from using BI-RADS. So the BI-RADS, which is the lexicon that the doctors are trained to look, if it has lobulations or speculations, the neural net doesn't do that. So the neural net finds its own things, and it finds its own independent assessment of what's going on. And now the problem is the doctor, the problem that you have is the doctor doesn't believe it. It's like, I don't see that this cancer, I don't see it. It's not speculated. So the other contribution that we came up with is a saliency map. So what a saliency map is that each pixel in the image, you could think of it, basically when you use backpropagation in neural nets, the backpropagation is a chain rule of the derivatives, and that tells you how sensitive, as you go all the way back to the pixels, how sensitive the partial derivatives of the score with each pixel. So by looking at the sensitivity, you know that this pixel really, when I said it was cancer, it was these pixels here that really were very sensitive to that. So now we highlight those pixels, and the doctor could look at it and go, oh, I see. I didn't see that before, or that's interesting. I never thought that, and maybe, so the fusing of or augmenting human intelligence with artificial intelligence is, I find, a fascinating.
Absolutely.
Thing.
That there's a lot of opportunities there. In this paper, you also mention a denoising neural network. What exact neural network preprocessor you say? So what exactly is that?
So it's well, sometimes it's like an autoencoder. So what happens is instead of training a neural net and saying, this is a cancer and this is not cancer, or this, is a tumor. So another thing you could do is just say, okay, put an image in and get the same image out. But the image I put in could have glare on it, could have shading on it, could be a poorly taken defocused photograph, and what comes out is a focused photograph. And in the middle, what you do is you reduce the dimensionality as you're going through the convolutional encoder. As you go through the neural network, you're going down, you're reducing the dimension of the space, reducing the number of numbers that you need to represent the image, and then you go back up. So what happens is you can train a denoiser to get rid of those extra degrees of freedom that bring in random noise or bring in distortion. So that's what we did, so that when a person takes a photograph with their phone, there could be glare, or you could be geometrically distorted at an angle, or you could have all sorts of aberrations, keystoning and different things that you get. And all those things are inverted out by using a deep learning, rather than mathematically correcting and doing image restoration and trying to figure out the point spread function of each blur function and inversing it, which is an ill-posed problem. We use this neural network.
So it's a bit like the lower layers of a deep neural network.
Well, it starts that way, and then it goes down it reduces the dimensionality, and then it goes back up. So it's actually a deconvolution. It goes to a smaller representation, and then it goes back up to the bigger representation.
I see.
And the idea is that when you get to the it's sort of like principal component analysis, or reducing the dimensionality of a space down to the most essential latent variables that you need to represent that image. And then those variables do not include the noise, which are the unnecessary, irrelevant, shading and stray illumination and distortion. So when you get back to the image, it's now a pristine image.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is, seems like an area where computers, artificial intelligence in general, is going to have a lot of impact, I think, because, when you have very complex images, and each image has, in some sense, its own characteristics, because it's the matrix and it's a combination of things that really ultimately makes a decision for the interpreter. I think humans are not that great to
Right.
to identify patterns, combinations of patterns that they haven't really been trained on. Whereas we are getting, with improving technology, machines are getting better and better at it. So, what is your expectation, Rick? And if you look forward next 5 years, what do you think we will be at 5 years from now, from a diagnostics perspective? Increasingly, we find even typically EMR data like demographics, family history, surgical history, medications, lab results are good enough pre-diagnosis to assign a reasonable probability that the patient is going to progress into different disease states like hypertension or type 2 diabetes or something like that. And that is almost as good as what a human would conclude. And that's not very complex data. Even humans are supposed to be very good at that compared to computers. But even there, we are finding computers to be reasonably good. So what is your expectation 5 years from now? How would AI change the diagnostic arena for healthcare?
Well, yeah, right now you have many, I would say like small groups, say working on breast cancer, working on hypertension, working on bones, working on lung. And what's going to happen is these are all be integrated together. And there are big companies like IBM, Watson and things, where they're looking at, in genetic data, they're following up on how patients are being treated and doing prediction. And the huge problem, just like the genome, evolved, eventually what has to happen is all these parts have to come together. So like even our little study, what we did was when a doctor detects breast cancer, they really don't just look at the image. So they're looking at the woman's age, uh, the vitals of the woman, all the different statistical information that helps them form their diagnostic opinion.
Yeah.
And right now, AI is being done in these siloed ways due to the data privacy issues, and just due to the finite amount of time and resources that each entity has, even IBM. And I think what's going to happen is as we integrate more and more things together, and as we work through the problems of data privacy, and people become less fearful of it, and maybe we work out some legal who owns the data, and all this kind of thing, that what's going to happen is the whole body, all the information will be available, and we'll find correlations with things that were unexpected. So the human brain has prejudices, right? So when we're discovering things, we evolve to find, like what you were saying before about the image restoration application that we're doing. It's easy to camouflage things, and there's also visual tricks that you could fool humans. We're not perfect by any means in the ability to make sense out of our senses, but computers, like we said before, computers have a different way of using language as best I can, but it's the AI algorithms are looking at different things and using different kinds of logic. And what we really want to do is augment that. So we may find genetic patterns that we could never see with one mind. One mind could never look at it and see that this complex pattern that went across all these diseased patients was there, because it's just not a linear correlation type of pattern. It's a very nonlinear, very dynamic type of pattern that humans are not made to see. So I think this will lead us into a new era of really of science, of scientific thinking, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, and the good thing about computers, obviously, is that they don't complain and they don't get distracted either. So
yeah,
the results are more uniform at the very least. So I want to conclude with something that you wrote on the Medium recently. About startups, where the venture capital industry don't really look at sort of the companies in the middle who are yet to get revenue, but almost at the threshold of a scale up, and they tend to die there. What are your thoughts on how this could be changed, and what policy direction might be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, and this is actually an extension of what we've been talking about, because trying to go too far, so 10 years ago, trying to go all the way to the ultrasound AI system that would replace mammography was probably naive. I mean, the medical infrastructure is set up the way it is, and it's profitable. So the idea is that if you have a startup company, if you're a professor in a university, so the first part of the article I talk about, there's a new Congress is trying to pass this Endless Frontier Act, which would put a lot more money into the pure R&D and trying to get it further along, trying to get to things like, new ways to diagnose cancer and cure cancer and things like that. But then the problem arises that, okay, you have something that's brand new, it's radically different, and maybe, you yourself and some friends put in some money, and you show the feasibility, you make a little device. The problem is that you can't get venture capitalists, you can't get investors, because it's too risky.
Yeah.
And honestly, what I've learned now a couple of times is that usually it takes 10 or 20 years, and venture capitalists, they form an LLC, their entire fund only lasts 10 years. So
right.
They
have to exit. They have to exit.
They want an exit.
Yeah.
They're not looking to help the world. That's like, that's low on their list. It's when do I get my profit? The faster and the more profit, the better you are. So how do we, in a capitalistic society that's so profit oriented, how do we get money? It's better for society. It's better for all of us to fund these things. Mm-hmm. So what I'm working on and trying to push is that there was a program back in 2001 called the New Markets Venture Capital Program, and the idea was that that social entrepreneurship is this idea that you can have multiple bottom lines. It doesn't have to be money alone, just profit alone. It could be social benefit, it could be environmental benefit, and there's even others. So the idea is, how do we, in a pure capitalistic society, how do we get those private enterprise is not going to invest in making a better environment, environmental changes, and making all the reason that I had to change the scope of my company and go towards the reduction of biopsies was because no investor wants to invest in helping the developing world. There's no money there. It's like, those women are dying, and so the idea is governments really should allocate long-term money to help these projects, and they do with the R&D, but R&D is only part of the problem. Venture capitalists put in more money than our entire R&D budget's $130 billion. Venture capitalists in the United States put in more than $130 billion. And that's the way it is, because commercializing something, innovating something, making a product out of something is a very expensive, very arduous, different skills, and professors aren't going to do it. Universities aren't going to do it. So what we need to do is build up this innovation class, and just like there's a National Science Foundation, there should be a National Innovation Foundation.
Right. That's it's a great way to think about it. I mean, you have a concept here social return, which I think is a great way to think about it, right? So these are activities that a private company will not get involved because the profits are going to be distributed to society, and so they can really get the financial returns from that. And so nobody jumps in first to do these types of things, and so we kind of open up a big vacuum. The basic R&D is there, the feasibility perhaps even there, but to take it to the next step that could have a significant effect on society, there is a gap there in terms of funding, right?
Right. And also organizations,
Yeah.
because the it's not just it will be distributed, which people lose interest. Nobody uh, like I've run centers in universities where we have multiple industry partners, and the problem with that is everybody owns it, so nobody owns it, so nobody wants it. That's the first problem. The other problem is a lot of these things take a really long time. The internet kind of came about through a couple of serendipitous. Was I worked on it back as a grad student when it was done for national security reasons, and then everyone knows the story now. But these things evolve haphazardly. What if we had a group of people, just like there are professors, there's thousands of professors doing R&D. What if there were thousands of people who are constantly looking at the outputs of R&D and trying to take a longer term view? They don't have to get immediate profit. They have an infrastructure, just like professors do, where they make things, where they
Right.
actually take it. So I don't have it worked out, obviously. But I think that's what, in order to get the environmental problems addressed, in order to get social problems addressed, we need some other part of our society that's not so quarter by quarter profit driven. It's like our healthcare
Yeah.
industry. It
Yeah.
doesn't work. It's not a free market.
Yeah, it's also a lot of diverse problems that are uncorrelated. So it is risky. Each one of them is risky. But if we can pool that into a much larger risk pool, society can diversify that risk pretty well, right?
Exactly.
And that sounds like we don't have mechanisms to do that effectively. And it's a great area to think about. I know that you're involved in some of those, with your activities outside the university. Um, so this has been great, Rick. I really appreciate the time that you spent with me.
Yeah, it's been great
Uh,
fun, Gil. And I think you're doing a great job. I love what you're doing.
Thanks so much, and good luck with everything that you do.
You too. Take care.
Okay, take care. Bye.